All right, today we're diving into a map of the human mind that is, well, pretty radical. It's controversial, and it challenges the very foundations of what we think consciousness even is. We're getting into the work of psychiatrist Stanislav Grof, whose research suggests our psyche is way bigger, deeper, and honestly more mysterious than we ever imagined. So let's just start with this one. Simple question. Is your mind bigger than your brain? Now, the standard scientific view, the one we all learned in school, says no way. It says consciousness is just a fluke, a side effect of that 3-pound lump of tissue between your ears. But what if that's not the whole story? What if your brain isn't the factory, but more like the antenna? You know, this idea isn't even brand new. Over 100 years ago, the amazing psychologist William James basically said our everyday reality is just one tiny island in a huge uncharted ocean of consciousness. What Grof did was take that beautiful philosophical idea and drag it right into the real world, into clinical practice, giving us a map to those hidden realms.
So here's our game plan for this journey inward. We're going to start with Grof's new model of the mind. Then we'll look at a really cool way our memories are organized. From there, we'll go deeper into the intense experience of our own birth, look at the 4 stages of that, and finally, we'll zoom all the way out to our connection with, well, everything.
Okay, first things first. To really get how revolutionary Grof's ideas are, we've got to look at the old model, the one he was pushing against. For centuries, Western science has been running on a very specific, kind of mechanical set of assumptions about how reality works.
Yeah, this is the old Newtonian view of the world. In this model, the universe is just a giant clock. Everything is made of solid matter, and things like life, intelligence, and consciousness, they're just accidental side effects of brain chemistry. Basically, your brain is a factory, and consciousness is just the smoke coming out of the smokestack. An accident, really.
Grof comes along and just completely flips that metaphor on its head. He says, look, just because brain activity is linked to consciousness doesn't prove the brain creates it. Think about it like this. A TV repairman knows exactly which broken wire is messing up the picture, but that doesn't mean the TV set is creating the evening news, right? Of course not. Grof proposes the brain is simply the receiver, tuning into a signal of consciousness that exists outside of it. And this whole shift in thinking didn't come from some armchair philosophy. It came from decades of intense research into non-ordinary states of consciousness. From that research, Stanislav Grof mapped out 3 basic levels of our psyche. First, there's the biographical level, our personal history. Then it gets deeper with the perinatal, which is all about the trauma of birth. And finally, the transpersonal, which connects us to, well, all of existence. So, how does this map actually work in the real world? Let's start with the level we think we know best, our biographical memories, our life story. What Grof found is that even here, there's a hidden organizing principle that secretly shapes our entire emotional life.
He called this principle a coax system, which is short for System of Condensed Experience. The idea is that our memories aren't just filed away chronologically, like books in a library. Nope. Instead, they're clustered together in these big constellations, all linked by the same core feeling. So all your experiences of feeling rejected might form one giant coax system. All your moments of pure joy, another. To really see this in action, let's look at the story of a man Grof called Peter. Now, Peter was plagued by this really disturbing and dangerous obsession, a compulsive need to be tortured by men dressed in black. And you can imagine, traditional therapy just wasn't getting anywhere with this.
As Grof worked with Peter, this incredibly powerful COX system started to surface. At the top layer, you had his adult obsession, but underneath that, there was a traumatic memory from World War II. Deeper still, he remembered being abused as a child by his parents. But the anchor for this whole chain of pain, the root pattern, was the raw, preverbal trauma of his own difficult birth. That was the original experience of confinement and torture that was echoing through his entire life.
And that right there brings us to the second, much deeper level of Grof's map, the perinatal realm. This is maybe his most controversial and his most powerful idea, that the way we are born leaves a permanent stamp on our psyche for the rest of our lives. So here's the mind-blowing part. Grof's research suggests our birth isn't just some messy biological event we don't remember. No, it's a profound psycho-spiritual ordeal, an experience that happens around the time of birth, which is what perinatal means. The struggle, the pressure, the terror, the suffocation, and then that final release, all of it forms a fundamental blueprint for how we deal with challenges, how we form relationships, and even how we feel about life itself. Grof identified 4 distinct stages, or matrices, in this incredible journey. He called them the basic perinatal matrices, or just BPMs for short, and each one corresponds to a specific phase of labor and delivery, and each one carries its own unique psychological flavor.
And man, the first two stages represent this unbelievable shift, a total flip from paradise to prison. BPMI is that state of blissful, floating unity in the womb before labor starts. He calls it the amniotic universe. But as soon as those first contractions begin, that paradise is lost. We get thrown into BPMI, which is a state of cosmic engulfment with no way out, because the uterus is squeezing but the cervix isn't open yet.
Yeah, these first two blueprints, they really represent the extreme poles of human experience, from feeling at one with the universe to absolute, total despair. Let's really try to feel into what he's talking about with each of these.
So the experience of the good womb, BPMI, is one of just oceanic ecstasy. It's a state where you have no boundaries, just total peace and connection to everything. This ancient blessing, it just captures that feeling perfectly, that serene unity, a deep memory of a time when all our needs were met without even trying. It's the root of our spiritual search for paradise. But the shift into BPM 2 is, well, it's terrifying. This quote from the mystic Saint Teresa of Avila, where she's actually describing a vision of hell, it perfectly captures the feeling of that no-exit stage. It's pure, hopeless suffering. It's the imprint of being trapped, crushed, and suffocated, an experience that Grof says becomes the deep root of our anxiety, our depression, and that feeling of existential dread. Okay, so if the story ended there, with just our personal history and our birth trauma, that would already be a huge deal, right? But Grof's research kept pointing to something even bigger, to experiences that went way beyond the individual, and that led him to map the third and final realm, the transpersonal. Now this brings up a really baffling question. How in the world can someone have an authentic experience of being one of their ancestors, or feel what it's like to be an animal? To explain this, Grof uses a really cool analogy from physics, the hologram. A hologram, as you might know, is a special kind of 3D photograph recorded on a plate using lasers. And here's the magical part. Unlike a regular photograph, if you break a holographic plate into 1,000,000 tiny pieces, each tiny fragment still contains all the information needed to reconstruct the entire three-dimensional image. The part contains the whole. This, Grof suggests, is the key to the transpersonal realm. Our consciousness operates on a holographic principle. We are not isolated, separate beings locked in our skulls. Each of us is a microcosm, a tiny fragment that reflects and contains the information of the entire macrocosm, all of history, all of nature, the entire universe. So let's just step back for a second and look at what this wild new map is really telling us. It suggests that consciousness isn't just some local thing happening inside our heads. It means that our deepest life patterns, our biggest fears, can be traced all the way back to the blueprint of our birth. It proposes that we have access to a universal library of information, and maybe, most profoundly, it means that you and I are not just in the universe is in us. This whole expanded map of who we are, it leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. We spend so much time and energy exploring the outer world, but what if Grof is right? What if the greatest journey of discovery isn't outward to the stars, but inward, into the vast, uncharted cosmos that each of us carries inside?